Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 1975 first summer blockbuster film ever, Jaws, and I'm just going to throw some things out immediately. This movie looks amazing. I'm not going to comment too much on how amazing it looks. We all know the prowess of Steven Spielberg, especially at this point in our lives. So it looks great. Let's get that out of the way. Directing, cinematography, all that stuff. The acting is great. Everyone knows a lot about this film. I'm mainly going to be maybe teaching some, well, not teaching, but mainly throwing out some ideas about some theories on this and some analysis and breakdown of the actual film. But another thing I'm not going to do is name a bunch of films that Steven Spielberg's done, because we all know for the most part. So, directed by Steven Spielberg, this was after Sugarland Express and before Encounters of the Third Time, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's been one of those days, people. So obviously this was the film that put him on the map, and if you watch it, you can easily see why. It is basically a masterpiece. Steven Spielberg himself has said that he kind of believed that he made the quintessential shark movie, which I can't think of another shark movie that really comes close, to be honest. Can you? Put it in the comments if you can. This was written by Peter Benchley, who also wrote The Deep, The Island, and a Jaws novel, as well as Carl Gottlieb, who also wrote Jaws 2, The Jerk, Jaws 3D, and did a bunch of writing for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. Yes, the Yo-Yo guys. This was the first summer blockbuster, as I said before, with an estimated to be over 67 million people who saw this film in the theater. If you think about that, that's freaking mind-blowing. And ever since, films have been chasing that summer blockbuster status, or at least studios have for the most part. The other thing is there's a ton of information, like behind the scenes, extra information, interesting tidbits about Jaws that you can find online. I'm not going to present even a fraction of that. I'm just going to present a few things that I found more interesting. And if there's more that you want, you can go out there and get it yourself, because there's a ton. The Jaws music that John Williams presented to Spielberg originally, Spielberg thought was a joke at first, because it was so simplistic. I'm talking specifically about the bass sound of dun dun. He thought it was a joke because it was too simplistic. But then when he kind of got more into it, talked to him about it, he was like, "Oh yeah, this is actually really useful. It's very good." So I thought that was funny. It was reported that Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw, who played Hooper and Quint, actually didn't get along on the set, which helped with the tension in certain scenes between their characters. I found that to be super interesting. That's method in a sense, so it definitely worked, because they definitely seemed to hate each other at times. I'm assuming it was tougher for the parts then where they were supposed to be getting along, which wasn't a whole lot of the film, but there were those moments. Spielberg chose to set many shots at water level to make the viewer actually feel like they were in the water with people. I think that's a genius move, in my opinion. It kind of connects you more with whoever's in the water at that point. It kind of makes you a little bit more of a character. It gives you a character perspective, like first person, basically. So it's cool. And the other thing is it's used a lot where, especially in the beginning, where you can't see a whole lot, because a lot of films would kind of show you from above and you can see the shark coming after the person, and then you can see him getting the person and stuff. But it works so much better, at least in the beginning, when they're still trying to hide the shark, to see a vicious attack happen, like with the first victim. But you're seeing it at water level, so it looks crazy, it looks chaotic. You don't even know at that point what's grabbed her. So your mind is just racing. It's just trying to figure out what is going on here. And you can focus on not the creature that's doing it, but the brutality of the act that's happening at that point and how distressing it is. And that first death, by the way, is super distressing. It is violent, viciously violent. And I don't think people give that enough credit. The low bass music with a shark POV underwater in the beginning of the film really does set the feel for the film very well. It lets you know the level of danger when the shot of the first victim from below is looking up from underwater as well. So basically, having that music with that kind of shark POV in the water lets you know there's something in the water. and then it actually gets someone. So you've already had that laid down. So you're like, okay, there was something dangerous in the water lurking. So it's great storytelling. It lays down everything you need to know without specifically saying things to you. It's showing you. This is what great filmmakers do. They show you instead of tell you. Drunk, horny youngsters get killed first. Well, at least one of them does. Very typical morality deaths for horror films of this time period. Yes, there was for quite some time the rule that, if someone was having sex or doing drugs or playing, terrible pranks on people or embezzling money or whatever, they're gonna die. The evil in the film will get them if it's a horror film. And obviously that rule was at play initially in this film. But then it goes further, which is part of the genius of who gets killed. It shows that there aren't necessarily rules for a killer like a shark because it's an animal. We don't fully understand their psyche. They're not human, even though a lot of times we want to, put human personality and human qualities on animals. They are not. And I think this film showcases that very well, especially when you have the people who are going after, Brody, Quint, and Hooper, who are trying to outsmart the shark, but they can't because it's not predictable. They go off of what they know of other sharks, but this is its own shark. So I love the fact that that's what's at play in this film. It works extremely well. The first victim's death is vicious the way it's shot, and the water level shooting of it increases how real it feels because it's more chaotic. You also don't see more than the victim themselves. So they are front and center. They are the focus. The viciousness of that attack, like I was saying, is the focus. So there's a lot of impact. There's an insane amount of impact. That is it might be the most harrowing scene in the film for me personally, because it's vicious. Cool how when Brody types shark attack for cause of death on his typewriter, it's telling the audience what they didn't see. Yes, because at that point you haven't seen a shark. You don't know it's necessarily a shark. It could have been a person in a wetsuit going around trying to kill people. Because it's called Jaws and you see the poster, that's the assumption. But if you go into the film blind, at that point, you don't know what happened to that person. You saw what happened, but you don't know what was under the water. So when he's typing shark attack, that is saying to the audience, it was a shark. Now you know. It's a true money over people moment when Brody gets crap for trying to shut down the beach because it's a tourist town. Now this is something that's been kept in all films that have taken Jaws and cribbed off of it. Think films like Alligator and Piranha and Grizzly, which are also extremely fun and I highly recommend them. But it started a trend, obviously. It did so well that people were trying to do something similar with different animals, basically. But I'm so glad for that because you got some great stuff. But yeah, there's always that little vein through each of the films of greed driving, putting people in more danger. So it truly is that, money over people situation, which actually does happen in real life. And that's what undermines people who are trying to do the right thing. A lot of the times, greed is the root of all evil, as people say. And in this film, it definitely happens. Had Brody been taken more seriously immediately, you would have only had that first victim die. Not most likely, but potentially. We at least know that the two victims after the first victim would not have happened, most likely. You can feel how anxious Brody is watching people swimming at the beach when he wasn't allowed to shut things down. Every slightly distressed sound or hint of something in the water puts him on edge. And that's where the acting is great. You can see the expressions, you can see the way he's looking, but it's also in how the camera work is being done and what's being shown. And you're seeing people splashing around in the water and everything. And it's kind of darting around and it's showing you kind of quick cuts of shots. And it's showing how frantic his mind is at that point because he's worried. He's totally on edge because he feels like it's just a matter of time and then someone's going to get attacked. And obviously that is what happens. It ends up being that kid on the raft, which is the moment that tells you, man, nobody is safe in this film. At first you think maybe it's going to be the dog. Well, actually, I think does the dog actually end up getting it? I can't recall, but yeah. Then the crazy zoom in on Brody when the attack finally happens is like a head rush for Brody. but it gets experienced by the viewer. I think that's a really good visualization of that head rush moment of realizing that something's going down, something terrible is happening. And I don't know how filmmakers do it. I need to look into that, but it's that shot where like they're zooming in on the character, and like the back, like the scenery's moving in, but they're kind of staying center. It's weird. I'm not sure how it's done. Someone could probably educate me on that, but it looks amazing, and I always love when it happens in film. And it was perfect for this moment because it's this surreal craziness visually done, and it gets that through to the viewer what's going on in Brody's head at that point. It's great. Your first impression of Quint is he's an arrogant jerk, but then you eventually understand he's just the right guy for the job. He just has the experience, he knows what he's doing, and actually, he's also drunk. That's another aspect. You know, liquid courage will kind of make you a jerk from time to time as well. Or all the time, honestly, because Quint actually doesn't ever seem like he's that good or soft of a guy. But I guess when he gets softer is when he drinks even more. Because of that one scene when it's like Hooper, Quint, and Brody, you know, on the boat really drinking and sharing all their stories about their various scars that they have. You know, a real man's moment. The pictures of shark attack aftermath that Brody looks at in the book is extremely gruesome. It drives home how awful and violent the attacks are for the victims. Yeah, really gets that through to the viewer. Really got that through to me personally. They're jarring, and they're meant to be jarring, and that just shows you what they don't show you a whole lot of in the film. Like, they don't show you a full mutilated body. They show you pieces from time to time, but in the book, they show you that. And it's kind of like, that's the moment where it really sinks in, like, how terrible it would be to go through a shark attack. All the guys in boats trying to catch Jaws plays out like a kind of ridiculous scene. It's very over the top. It's chaotic. Everyone's out there trying to make the, what is it, like $3,000 initially that they place bounty on the head of Jaws. I think it's a fun moment. It just shows the chaos. It shows how ill prepared people are, and it shows how poorly things are planned. Basically, it's chaotic, and you're like, you know, just seeing a scene set up like that and play out that way, that no one's going to catch the shark. They catch a shark, but they don't catch the shark. Hooper is a professional, and how flustered he gets looking at the remains of the second victim lets you know how dire the situation really is. Because you understand immediately that he knows what he's talking about. He's seen attacks. But when he sees this one, he gets concerned. And then that's in Richard Dreyfuss's acting as well. He does an excellent job with it, obviously. And that makes the viewer more concerned, because you're like, ooh, this is worse than what he's used to seeing, which is bad in the first place. So that was good. You feel the craziness of what Brody has to deal with from everyone in the town, because you get a mix of people yelling at him, being concerned, and private moments of Brody actually contemplating and worrying, and you realize that he's basically in a lose-lose situation. This film does a very good job of getting inside the head of Brody and showing you that he's literally between a shark and a hard place, where there are certain things he wants to do, he can't do those things. And even if he could do those things, or if he couldn't do those things, people are going to still yell at him, people are going to think he's terrible. Sure, you're going to have some people who still respect him and like what he's doing, but he's in a tough spot. And that really comes through, especially with all the different reactions that he gets. I think the one that I think's a little over the top for me is when the mother of, I think it was the second victim, comes up and slaps him on the beach. I was like, that's a little bit much, because it's not his fault. Like, it literally wasn't his fault. And at that point, if I were him, I would have just said, it's the mayor who, I wanted to shut all this down, and your son would still be alive. It's the mayor who did this. I would have just pointed that finger. And real quick, pause for horror hydration. This is going to be a longer one. And it deserves it, let's be honest. I love the scene where Brody and Hooper go out on Hooper's boat at night while they're drunk, because that's a moment that you actually start seeing that they're not just characters in this together, that there's a friendship forming. Like, they're actually bonding with each other, which, you know, That's what happens, when you drink with someone, when you get drunk with someone, a lot of times you end up loosening up, really bonding, feeling like a kinship with them to some degree, and that happens. And then obviously that happens again in that scene with Hooper, Quint, and Brody on the boat when they're out hunting for Jaws. They bond, they come together, and then it makes it even more triumphant when they succeed, but it also makes it more terrible when Quint ends up getting chomped, which is a very good scene. The scene of Hooper losing it, arguing with Vaughn about the shark is awesome. The passion that Richard Dreyfuss conveys in that scene is awesome. I mean, it's great. Like, the performances in this are excellent. That, I think, acting-wise, is my favorite moment of the film, because he just goes ballistic on this guy, and it's like it's channeling the anger of the viewers, basically. Like, he's saying the things and yelling at the mayor the way you want to, Vaughn. Like, it's great. It's a wonderful moment. When all the tourists start rolling into almost said Amityville. I just did a review on Amityville Horror. In Amity, you're just seeing potential victims. As a viewer, you're seeing just potential victims rolling in. You're not seeing, oh, here comes tourist dollars. You're just seeing potential victims, which is probably what Hooper and Brody were seeing at this point as well. Just saying. It's after an hour into the film when you first see the shark, and it's really horrifying when you do because of the size. They did an excellent job pulling off Bruce the shark, the animatronic shark. Obviously, they do have some shots of actual sharks in there, but the animatronic shark is amazing because of how large he is and how large he looks in comparison to people, because once you first see that, it's breathtaking in a horrifying way. Or at least in my opinion, it definitely is. And you don't get it until 2 hours in. So you're kind of like guessing in your mind how big this thing is because it's being talked about within the film and you're seeing the aftermath of it. But once you see it, there's no substitute for that moment. You're just like, it's huge. That thing is gargantuan and it's nuts. It's great. When Brody's kid almost gets killed when it sinks in that you can't predict the behavior of the shark. Yeah, that is the moment where, they're going off all these things like Hooper's education and eventually Quint's experience, where they're saying, we can kind of predict what will happen with this shark. Typically they do this, typically they do that. But when the shark goes after Brody's kid and the friends on that raft, it feels like that's the moment it sinks in for Brody. This isn't a regular shark. Anyone is susceptible, basically, and we can't necessarily go based off what we already know. So it seems more dangerous at that moment. All the shark jaws that are displayed at Quint's place send the visual message that he's the best at catching sharks. So if he cannot be the one to catch this shark, everyone is screwed. Like how prolific he is at catching sharks, because you see all these jaws hung up around his, I guess it's like a cabin, like fishing cabin. You're like, this is the guy. And if this guy can't do it, nobody can, because obviously, from a visual standpoint, we see he has an insane amount of experience. This is what he does. Then that makes you remember when he was a jerk, and so they needed to up it to $10,000 instead of $3,000, and he would get the job done. Then you think, okay, he wasn't necessarily being a jerk. He just knows what it takes to get it done. Super cool shot looking down from above Quint in the crow's nest as he looked to both sides of the boat. Like Hooper on one side and Brody on the other side. Like the shot was above him in the crow's nest, and it like looks over to Hooper, and then it looks over to Brody, and it's showing him looking at him. I've just not seen a shot like that before, and I think it was really cool. But like I said, directorially, cinematography-wise, wonderful shots in this film. Looks amazing. That's just one I wanted to call out. When you see the size of the shark next to the boat, it makes you feel even more concerned for the outcome of the mission that Brody, Hooper, and Quint are on. At that moment, like, you feel like they have a chance because, like, they're a good team. Like, they're very competent. They know what they're doing. If they all pool their resources and their knowledge and their hard work, they can get this done. But as soon as you see Jaws, in comparison to the boat, you're like, literally, as it said, we're going to need a bigger boat. Like, it seems like it's way too much to handle from the viewer's perspective. And then that makes you think, well, what are they thinking at this point? Note how hopeful and upbeat the score becomes when Quint shoots Jaws with the spear to attach that first barrel. It happens again when he shoots and attaches another barrel too. Then it starts to slowly change to sound a bit more uncertain. This mirrors the mindset of Brody, Hooper, and Quint. They're very hopeful once they, hit it with things, and then as the score goes down, they're starting to be like, oh, this isn't doing what we thought it would. This isn't affecting the shark the way we thought it would. So things start to look less hopeful. So great work with the score. Booze and injury comparison. Nothing brings people closer. It's a key moment for Hooper and Quint, though. It marks the two strategies actually coming together. This is the moment where experience and education start working together instead of working against each other. They had plenty of moments within the film where they show them really butting heads and not getting along. And that's kind of symbolizing that someone who's educated on it and someone who's experienced with it aren't willing to come together. But once they get drunk and they're showing their injuries to each other, you understand, okay, this is where the bond is formed. Now they're going to start working together. Now they will have the best chance at taking the shark out, because experience plus knowledge, education, experience plus education is what works best, as opposed to just one of those things, especially for something like this, let's be honest. Quint's story about his horrible experience in World War II makes you excuse his gruff attitude to a degree, because it makes you actually realize how he became the person he is. Plus all the booze. Like, you understand he's a booze hound. And that's probably why he drinks so much, is my guess, is because of the horrific stuff that he lived through in World War II, which he tells you the entire story. So that makes you start to really sympathize with him if you didn't already to some degree, which most people probably weren't at that point. People were probably like, okay, this guy's, a badass, he's going to get the job done, but they weren't like, I like this guy on a personal level. But after that, you soften on him, and as do Brody and Hooper, so you're experiencing the same thing they are. Quint smashing the radio when Brody calls for help seems like a bad idea, but at first I was just like, what is he doing? This is a terrible idea. Why is this in the script? Why is this happening in the film? But when I thought about it a little bit more, I felt that it was because Quint didn't want more people called in to put them in danger, and he was pretty confident that they could actually get the job done. I think he kind of felt like, we can get this job done, and if we can't get this job done, we don't need more people becoming victims of the shark. I think that's what was really going on. Now, they don't say that, but if you think about it, I feel like that's what's happening. Pause again. Horror hydration. Told you this is going to be a long one. I'm almost there, though. Just a few more minutes. When everything's going wrong in the fight against Jaws towards the end, there is no score. Notice that. Love that. They let the sound of the chaos of what's going on be the score, which is perfection, in my opinion. Knowing when to pull the score back and just let the nuts aspect of what's going on be the score. You're hearing all the sounds, the splashing water, the yelling of the characters, rope breaking, like all these things becomes the score, and it says so much more than what a score would be able to tell you at that point. And you just don't need a score at that point, because you can see what's going on, and from a sound design standpoint, the chaos is captured extremely well. So I love that they did that. The way the shark cage scene is shot is very intense, and it feels very claustrophobic because it's obviously shot a lot from inside, which makes you feel like you are looking through Hooper's eyes. And let's be honest, that's a very terrifying situation to be in, because that cage was not that big. It really was not that big of a cage, and it is scary to be in that situation, or at least from the way they shot it, it looks super scary, especially when shark's coming at you and making progress in bending those bars. Very well shot. Love it. When the boat starts sinking eventually, their last advantage seems to be gone. Yeah, because at this point, how much as a human being can you do against a shark when you're in the water with them? When you're on a boat, you have a lot more things you can do. You at least have more stability. You have more motion. You're not inside their element, which is obviously water. Once that boat starts sinking, you see that they're going to end up in that water eventually, and then you are in Jaws' domain, and you are probably screwed. Just saying. Quint's death is also vicious. I know I said that the very first death is the most vicious. I think it still is to a degree with the way it plays out, but Quint's death is also pretty vicious, especially because, they head on show you halfway into the shark's mouth. And there's blood, and he's screaming and flailing around, and the shark's head's flailing around. It's awesome. I mean, it's great. The blown up body of Jaws in the end, sinking with blood pouring out of it, actually kind of looks pretty in the end. Do you agree? A lot of the times when you put something in water, it looks better than when it's not in water, and just like the remnants or the last chunk of the body just like sinking to the bottom, and all the blood kind of streaming out in these plumes of what look like smoke, but it's underwater, so obviously it's not. It's gorgeous. It's a beautiful shot, and it's weird to say that because it's carnage, but we're into horror, so we love to see beautiful carnage, and that's really what happens at the end. The pacing is great with this film. It really just keeps moving, which I think is hard to do with a film about a killer animal, because a lot of them don't have pacing that great. Also, it's like 2 hours and 4 minutes, I believe, with credits, and it's hard to make a movie that's that long have excellent pacing, and there is excellent pacing in this. It's an excellent film. This film plays heavily on the fear that man can't truly control nature, especially when out of its element, like on or underwater. And that's what you end up fearing, obviously, like I was talking about, that the characters are going to end up underwater. And this does go to a long fear. Like, people have always felt like they can control their environment. They can control the animals around them. They can take them out. But what happens when you get into that instance where you're being outsmarted, you're being outmaneuvered by an animal? It's a huge fear of humans, and they're not used to feeling that lack of control. So I think this film and films like this film really play to that fear, that what happens if we're no longer the alpha predator? If we no longer can handle what's out there. So I think it works really well for that reason. The issues between Quint and Hooper is an age-old tension that stays, relevant within our society right now. It's a tension between experience and education, which work the best together, but separately is not the best. I mean, if you think about it, it's a lot of like blue collar versus white collar, education versus experience. Although you can, you obviously have crossover with those. Someone who is blue collar has education and experience. Someone who is white collar has education and experience. But it's more that people who are blue collar have more experience and some education, where people who are white collar have some experience and more education. So it's kind of, or at least that's the way it's seen within society. And there's always been that tension of like, oh, well, who's better? And, one thinking they are better than the other, and that causes further tensions. But when you realize that education and experience works best together, we should all be able to get past that. And this film shows that when Quint and Hooper come together. And I love that you can read that into the film. Maybe people need to watch Jaws again so we can get our country coming back together, and understanding that we need experience and knowledge, education and experience. Just saying. But those are my thoughts on Jaws. Obviously, this went pretty long. It's one of my longest reviews. I think my other long ones were The Shining and Candyman. But out of 5 stars with half stars in play, 5 stars. I mean, I can't knock it down a half star because I can't find anything to complain about. I mean, can you? Tell me in the comments. I mean, the only thing I kind of complained about was the woman slapping Brody, but that's such a minor thing. It's a 5-star film. It's wonderful. It's amazing. I see why it was the first summer blockbuster. And I also see why Spielberg was like, I'm not doing any more shark films because I did the shark film. He did do it. Here it is. Anyway, this has been awesome. I would love to hear your opinions on Jaws. Go ahead and put it in the comments. Oh, also, I don't think I told you, I'm planning to do reviews on all the Jaws films. Well, the other 3. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to be releasing them in consecutive weekends. I'm not going to do like Saturday Sunday release. I'm just going to do like every Saturday or one every weekend for 4 weekends, just to space it out a little bit, get a little variety. But let me know your thoughts on Jaws, anything you want to talk about, or just horror related in general. That'd be great. Subscribe to my channel for me, please. I put a lot of work into these, and that's the way you repay me, is quick, painless, costs you nothing, and I appreciate it greatly. Also hit the notification bell button, because then you'll know whenever I put up a new video, and if you can watch that as soon as possible, it helps it gain more traction, so consider that if you can. But regardless, I really thank you for sticking with this long video and taking your time doing that, because it is humbling to know that people watch these videos this much. So I thank you for that. But until next time, keep it brutal.